The Alpha's Regret, a mafia romance. He commanded an army of killers and owned half the city, but he would lose his entire soul simply because he pressed decline on the one call that mattered. Before we step into this world of power, betrayal, and heartbreaking regret, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss a single chapter of this story. Now let's begin. Part 1. The champagne in Lorenzo's glass cost more than most men earned in a year. It tasted crisp, cold, and like absolute victory. Standing on the balcony of the Obsidian Tower, the tallest skyscraper in the city, Lorenzo Moretti looked down at the glittering lights of New York. Tonight was his coronation in all but name. The merger with the Russo family was complete. The contracts were signed, the ink barely dry, cementing his status as the Capo dei Capi, the boss of bosses. At 32, he was the youngest alpha to ever hold the title, a predator in a bespoke tuxedo who had clawed his way to the top with ruthless efficiency. "They're waiting for you inside, Don Moretti," his second-in-command, Marco, said, stepping out onto the terrace. Marco was a beta, loyal to a fault, but tonight even he looked nervous. "Russo wants to make the toast official." Lorenzo swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his sharp jawline illuminated by the city glow. "Let him wait. It reminds him who owns this building." "Of course, sir. But," Marco hesitated, "your phone has been vibrating on the table for the last 10 minutes. Is everything all right at the estate?" Lorenzo glanced at the sleek black smartphone resting on the marble patio table. The screen lit up again, buzzing angrily against the stone. "Incoming call, Julian Omega. Love." A flicker of irritation tightened Lorenzo's chest. Julian, his beautiful, gentle, and utterly exhausting Omega. "He's fine," Lorenzo said, his voice a low rumble that commanded instant submission from anyone nearby. "He's just anxious. He hates it when I leave him alone for these events. He seemed distinctively pale when we left, boss," Marco ventured carefully. "Maybe you should answer? Just to settle him." Lorenzo scoffed, picking up the phone. He stared at the name flashing on the screen. Julian was the only soft thing in Lorenzo's brutal life. An Omega with eyes like dough-brown velvet and a scent of honey and lavender that could bring Lorenzo to his knees in the privacy of their bedroom. But lately, Julian had been suffocating. Perhaps it was the stress of the impending turf war, or maybe it was just the Omega instinct to nest, but Julian had been clinging to him like a shadow for weeks, calling him over every creaking floorboard, every bad dream, every shadow in the garden. "Lorenzo, come home. Lorenzo, I have a bad feeling. Lorenzo, please don't go tonight." "I told him," Lorenzo muttered, thumb hovering over the screen. "I told him tonight is the most important night of my life. I told him not to interrupt unless the house was burning down." The phone stopped buzzing. Then, a second later, it started again. "Incoming call, Julian Omega. Love." "He's persistent," Marco noted uncomfortably. "He's defying me," Lorenzo corrected, his alpha pride bristling. In the ballroom inside, the most dangerous men in the country were waiting to kiss his ring. He couldn't be seen taking domestic calls like a henpecked husband. It showed weakness. And in this world, weakness got you killed. Lorenzo silenced the call. "If it was an emergency, the security detail would have called me. The guards at the mansion are the best money can buy. Julian is safe. He's just lonely." "Understood, boss." "Let's go inside," Lorenzo said, buttoning his jacket. "It's time to take the throne." He left the phone on the balcony table. Face down. 10 miles away, the Moretti estate was not safe. It was a slaughterhouse. Julian was hiding in the master bedroom closet, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the phone. The heavy oak door of the bedroom shuddered as something heavy slammed against it from the hallway. Bang. "Open up, pretty Omega," a voice sneered from the other side. It wasn't one of the guards. The guards were dead. Julian had watched from the landing as the first one fell, throat slit by a shadow that moved too fast to be human. Julian whimpered, pressing his hand over his mouth to stifle the sound. Tears streamed down his face, hot and fast. The smell of blood, alpha blood, thick and metallic, was permeating the house, overpowering his own scent of terrified lavender. He looked at the phone screen. Call declined. His heart shattered. Lorenzo wasn't answering. "Lorenzo, please," Julian whispered into the silence of the closet, his thumb hitting redial. "Please, Alpha. Pick up. I need you. Our baby needs you." He hadn't told Lorenzo yet. He had planned to tell him tonight, after the gala. A little pair of knitted shoes hidden in a gift box. He was 2 months pregnant, and his instincts had been screaming at him all day because his body knew danger was coming even if his mind didn't. That was why he begged Lorenzo to stay. Connecting. Ring. 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 Come on, come on, Julian sobbed quietly. Outside, the bedroom door gave a splintering crack. They were breaking it down. Back at the Obsidian Tower, the party was in full swing. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cigars, and power. Lorenzo stood at the center of the room, a king holding court. To the Moretti-Russo alliance. Don Russo bellowed, raising his glass. To Moretti, the crowd roared. Lorenzo drank, the alcohol warm in his chest. He felt invincible. He felt like a god. Then, Marco appeared at his elbow again. His face was ashen. Boss, Marco whispered, urgency cutting through the noise. You need to check your phone. Lorenzo frowned, his mood instantly souring. I told you to leave it, Marco. No, boss. Not Julian, Marco said, holding out his own tablet. The security grid at the estate. It just went offline. All of it. Cameras, sensors, the perimeter alarm. Everything just went black. Lorenzo froze. The glass in his hand threatened to shatter under his grip. The security system at the mansion was military grade. It didn't just go offline. It had to be cut. When? Lorenzo demanded, his voice dropping to a terrifying octave. 3 minutes ago. Lorenzo didn't excuse himself. He didn't say goodbye to Russo. He turned and sprinted toward the balcony, Marco hot on his heels. He snatched his phone from the table. 14 missed calls. 5 new voicemails. All from Julian. The dread that hit Lorenzo was colder than ice. It wasn't the irritation he had felt earlier. It was a primal, sickening fear that clawed at his gut. His alpha instinct, dormant during the party, suddenly roared to life, screaming mate. Danger. Mate. He didn't call the guards. If the grid was down, the guards were already gone. He dialed the direct line to his elite enforcer team, stationed a mile from the house. Get to the mansion. Lorenzo barked into the phone as he ran toward the private elevator. Now, kill anyone who isn't Julian. He hung up and looked at his phone again. The last missed call was from 1 minute ago. His thumb hovered over the voicemail icon. His hand, which had held a gun steady while executing rivals, was shaking. He pressed play on the first voicemail. Static, heavy breathing. Lorenzo? Alpha? Please. I hear them downstairs. They killed Tony. They killed everyone. Where are you? Julian's voice was small, terrified. It was the voice of a boy waking up from a nightmare, except this nightmare was real. Lorenzo punched the wall of the elevator as the doors slid shut. Faster, he screamed at the metal box. He played the second message. They're cutting the power. It's dark. I'm going to the closet in the bedroom. I have the gun you gave me, but my hands are shaking too much. Lorenzo, why aren't you answering? Did I do something wrong? Are you angry with me? A tear leaked from Lorenzo's eye, hot and stinging. No, baby, no, he whispered to the device. I'm not angry. I'm coming. The elevator dinged at the parking level. Lorenzo sprinted toward his Bugatti, Marco struggling to keep up. Third message. They're at the door. Oh God, they're using an axe. Lorenzo, I'm so scared. I can smell them. Rogue Alphas. They smell like rot. Please, Alpha. Save me. Lorenzo started the car, the engine roaring like a beast. He tore out of the garage, tires screeching, leaving black rubber on the concrete. He didn't care about the speed limit. He didn't care about the traffic. He drove like a man possessed, weaving through cars at 120 miles per hour. Fourth message. They're inside the room. They found me. Lorenzo, I have to tell you something. I was saving it for tonight. I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect him. I tried to call you. I really tried. The world stopped. Lorenzo's vision blurred. The road ahead swam in a haze of tears. Pregnant. His heir. His child. Growing inside the man he had ignored to drink champagne with old men in suits. No. Lorenzo roared, a sound of pure animal agony that filled the car. He slammed his foot down harder on the gas pedal. Julian, hold on. He was 5 minutes away. 5 minutes. It might as well have been a lifetime. Fifth message. The final message. Lorenzo's finger trembled as he pressed play. He didn't want to hear it. He knew what it would be. But he had to witness his sin. The audio was chaotic. There was the sound of wood splintering, a struggle, the dull thud of a body hitting the floor. Get off him. That was Julian screaming, defiant but weak. Don't touch me. Then a harsh, unfamiliar voice. Look at his phone. Calling the big bad boss. He blocked you, sweetheart. See? Call declined. He doesn't care. You're all alone. He loves me. Julian screamed, but it ended in a choke. Then silence. A long, suffocating silence. And finally, a whisper, wet and gurgling, right against the microphone of the phone, as if Julian was curling around it as he died. Alpha, it hurts. I'm cold, good night, Lorenzo. I love why. The recording ended. Lorenzo Moretti, the king of New York, the alpha of alphas, screamed. He screamed until his throat tore, gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather cracked. He saw the gates of his estate ahead. They were hanging open, twisted off their hinges. Smoke was rising from the main house. He slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the gravel driveway. He threw the door open and ran. He ran past the bodies of his guards in the garden. He ran through the shattered front door. Julian. The house was silent. The only sound was the crackle of fire, starting in the library. Lorenzo took the stairs 2 at a time, tripping, scrambling, desperate. He reached the master bedroom. The door was hacked to pieces. He stepped inside. The room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, curtains torn. But Lorenzo saw none of it. His eyes locked on the figure lying on the floor by the closet. Julian. He was curled on his side, wearing one of Lorenzo's white dress shirts, now stained a horrific deep crimson. His phone was still clutched in his hand, pressed against his chest. Lorenzo fell to his knees. The distance between them vanished. He crawled the last few feet, his breath coming in jagged gasps. Julian, he choked out, reaching for the Omega. Julian, baby, look at me. I'm here. I'm here now. He turned Julian over. Julian's eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. The light was gone from them. His skin, usually so warm, was cooling rapidly. There was a single, brutal gunshot wound to his chest, right through the heart. No, Lorenzo whispered. He shook Julian's shoulders gently. No, no, no. Wake up. You can't do this. We have a baby. You can't leave me. He pulled Julian's limp body into his arms, burying his face in the Omega's blood-soaked neck. He inhaled deeply, desperate for the scent of lavender and honey. It was faint, fading. Underneath it was the scent of death. I silenced the call. Lorenzo sobbed into Julian's hair, rocking him back and forth. I silenced the call. I killed you. I killed both of you. He looked at the phone in Julian's dead hand. The screen was cracked, but still illuminated. It showed the call log. Outgoing call, Alpha Lorenzo. Cancelled. And below it, a drafted text message that was never sent. Don't worry about the party, my love. Have fun. I'll be waiting for you. Always. Lorenzo threw his head back and let out a howl of grief that shook the very foundations of the burning house. It was a sound of a man who had conquered the world, only to realize he had been holding nothing but dust. The king was alive, but his heart had just died in his arms. End of Part 1. Part 2. The fire had reached the hallway. The heat was becoming unbearable, curling the wallpaper and snapping the wooden beams overhead, but Lorenzo didn't move. He couldn't. He was still on the floor of the master bedroom, cradling Julian's body against his chest. The pristine white shirt Lorenzo had worn to the gala, the symbol of his ascension to power, was now ruined, soaked through with the blood of his mate and his unborn child. Boss, we have to move. Marco's voice was desperate, cracking through the haze of Lorenzo's dissociation. The beta enforcer coughed, waving away the thick black smoke that was rolling into the room. The roof is going to collapse, Lorenzo. You have to let him go. Lorenzo turned his head slowly. His eyes, usually a sharp, piercing steel gray, were completely black. The pupils had dilated so much that the iris was gone, a physiological sign of an alpha whose bond had been violently severed. It was the gaze of a rabid animal. I'm not leaving him, Lorenzo rasped. His voice sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. He's cold. He doesn't like the cold. Lorenzo, please. Marco grabbed his arm, risking his life by touching an unstable alpha. We can't save him if we burn to death. We have to get him out. We take him with us. That got through. Take him with us. Lorenzo nodded once, a jerky, mechanical motion. He shifted his grip, lifting Julian effortlessly into his arms. The Omega was so light. Too light. Lorenzo remembered teasing him just this morning about gaining a little weight around his waist, soft, beautiful weight that Lorenzo had loved to hold. Now he knew it wasn't weight. It was life. It was their son or daughter growing in the safety of Julian's womb. A safety Lorenzo had failed to provide. He stood up, swaying slightly as the bond break sickness hit him, a wave of nausea and vertigo that felt like his own soul was being ripped out through his chest. He gritted his teeth, snarling at the pain, and walked through the burning doorframe. He carried Julian down the stairs, ignoring the flames licking at the banister. He walked out the front door, past the arriving fire trucks, past the shouting paramedics, past his own men who had formed a perimeter. The cool night air hit him, but he felt none of it. He walked straight to the back of the ambulance. "Sir, we need to assess," a paramedic began, stepping forward. Lorenzo let out a low, vibrating growl that made the alpha paramedic freeze in primal terror. "Do not touch him," Lorenzo commanded softly. "No one touches him but me." The drive to the private clinic owned by the Moretti family was silent. Lorenzo sat in the back of the van, Julian's head in his lap. He spent the entire journey smoothing the hair back from Julian's forehead, cleaning a smudge of soot from his cheek with his thumb. "I'm sorry," he whispered, over and over again. A broken mantra. "I'm sorry I didn't answer. I'm sorry I was busy. I'm sorry." When they arrived, the clinical staff knew better than to interfere. They prepared a private room, not for treatment, but for preparation. Lorenzo refused to let the morticians handle the body. He asked for a basin of warm water, a sponge, and fresh clothes. For 2 hours, the most feared mafia boss in the city washed the blood off his dead husband. He traced the purple bruises on Julian's wrists, where he had fought back. He traced the horrific wound in his chest. He washed the dried blood from Julian's thighs, sobbing silently when he realized the stress of the attack had caused a miscarriage even before the bullet hit. "You fought so hard," Lorenzo murmured, buttoning a soft silk shirt onto the cooling body. It was Julian's favorite, a pale blue one that brought out his eyes. "You were so brave, my love. Braver than me." There was a knock on the door. Tentative. Terrified. "Enter," Lorenzo said. He didn't look up. He was adjusting the collar of Julian's shirt. It was Dr. Evans, the family physician. The old man looked shaken. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. "Don Moretti," the doctor said quietly. I completed the preliminary examination, as you requested." "Tell me," Lorenzo said. "The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the heart." "Instantaneous," Evans said. "But the autopsy confirmed." He hesitated. "Say it," Lorenzo ordered. His hands paused on Julian's chest. "He was 9 weeks pregnant," Evans whispered. "A male fetus. Healthy. Strong." Lorenzo closed his eyes. "A son. He had a son. And," Evans continued, his voice trembling, "we found traces of DNA under Julian's fingernails. Skin cells." He scratched his attacker. Lorenzo's eyes snapped open. The black void was gone, replaced by a burning, icy blue fire. "Do we have a match?" "Not in the public database," Evans said. "But we ran it against the Underworld Registry. It's a partial match to a bloodline." "Which bloodline?" "The precipitin test indicates. It's from the Russo family." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The Russo family. The family Lorenzo had just merged with. The family he had been toasting with champagne while his husband was being butchered. Don Russo had smiled at him, shaken his hand, called him son, all while his men were likely on their way to slaughter Lorenzo's entire world. Lorenzo stood up. He walked over to the metal tray where Julian's personal effects had been placed. The cracked phone. The wedding ring. He picked up the ring. It was platinum, simple and elegant. He slid it onto his own pinky finger, next to his signet ring. The metal was cold against his skin. "Marco," Lorenzo said. He didn't shout, but the voice carried through the door. Marco entered immediately. He had cleaned up, but his eyes were red-rimmed. He had loved Julian too. Everyone in the household did. Julian was the only one who treated the guards like humans, bringing them coffee on cold nights. "Yes, boss." "Prepare the funeral," Lorenzo said, turning to look at Julian's peaceful face one last time. "Make it public. Make it grand. Invite everyone. The heads of the 5 families. The politicians. The judges. And the Russos?" Marco asked, watching Lorenzo carefully. Lorenzo walked over to the table and picked up a scalpel. He tested the edge against his thumb, watching a bead of his own dark blood well up. "Especially the Russos," Lorenzo said. "I want Don Russo in the front row. I want him to look at the casket. I want him to think he got away with it." And then, Lorenzo stabbed the scalpel into the wooden table. It stood there quivering. "And then," Lorenzo said, "I am going to burn his entire lineage to the ground. I won't just kill them, Marco. I am going to make them watch everything they love die, just like I did. I will be the last thing they see before they go to hell." 3 days later, the funeral of Julian Moretti was the largest gathering of criminal power the city had seen in 50 years. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The sky wept gray tears over the black umbrellas that crowded the cemetery of St. Michael's. Lorenzo stood at the grave. He hadn't slept in 72 hours. He hadn't eaten. He was running on caffeine, whiskey, and hate. He wore a black suit, black shirt, black tie. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut. The dark circles under his eyes made him look like a revenant. He stared at the mahogany casket. It was closed. He wouldn't let them see Julian. Julian was his. My deepest condolences, Lorenzo, a gravelly voice said from his left. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly. Don Russo stood there. The old Alpha was wearing a look of practiced mourning. He reached out a hand to touch Lorenzo's shoulder. Lorenzo stepped back. A subtle, calculated insult. He wouldn't let the man touch him. Thank you, Don Russo, Lorenzo said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was a tragedy. A tragedy indeed, Russo sighed, shaking his head. Rogue Alphas, I heard? Disgusting animals. If you need help finding them, my resources are yours. That is very generous, Lorenzo said. He looked at Russo's hands. Old, spotted hands. Were these the hands that signed the order? Or was it his son, Santino, who stood behind him, looking bored and checking his watch? We are family now, Russo said, smiling slightly. The merger makes us one. Your loss is my loss. Liar. Lorenzo felt the bond mark on his neck throbbing. It was a phantom pain, an ache for a connection that was severed. It fueled him. I will find them, Lorenzo said, locking eyes with Russo. And when I do, I will ensure the punishment fits the crime. Russo's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Of course, justice must be served. As the priest began the final prayer, Lorenzo tuned it out. He looked around the crowd. He saw the pity in their eyes. Look at the broken Alpha, they were thinking. Look at how he lost his mate. He is weak now. Unstable. Let them think it. Let them believe he was broken. It would make them careless. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Lorenzo frowned. Only Marco had this number, and Marco was standing right behind him. He pulled the phone out, shielding it from the rain. Unknown number. He answered. Who is this? Don't hang up, Lorenzo. The voice was distorted, synthesized to hide the identity. But the tone was urgent. Who is this? Lorenzo repeated, his grip tightening on the phone. I'm someone who knows what happened that night. I know why the security grid went down. It wasn't just cut from the outside. Lorenzo walked away from the grave, stepping into the shadow of a crypt, away from the prying ears of the Russos. Keep talking. The code to disable the perimeter. It was entered from a remote terminal. But that code is only known by 3 people. You, your head of security, and my mate, Lorenzo whispered. Julian had the code for emergencies. There is a 4th, the voice said. Someone sold the code, Lorenzo. You have a traitor in your inner circle. The Russos didn't just break in. They were invited. Lorenzo felt the world tilt. A traitor. One of his brothers. One of the men who had sworn blood loyalty to him. Give me a name, Lorenzo hissed. Not yet. Check the bank accounts of your lieutenants. Look for a deposit from a shell company in the Caymans labeled Obsidian. You'll find your rat. Why are you telling me this? Because, the voice paused, and for a second the distortion wavered, sounding almost female. Because I know what it's like to lose everything to the Russos. Burn them all, Alpha. Leave no ash. The line went dead. Lorenzo lowered the phone. He looked back at the funeral. He looked at his men. His trusted circle. There was Marco, his second. Dante, his capo. Vinny, his head of security. Silas, his treasurer. They all stood with heads bowed, looking mournful. One of them had sold Julian for money. One of them had opened the door for the butchers. Lorenzo felt a cold smile stretch across his face. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the baring of teeth. He walked back to the grave. He grabbed a handful of wet earth and threw it onto the casket. The sound was a dull thud, final and heavy. Goodbye, my love, he whispered. Rest now. The hunting begins. He turned to Marco. Boss? Marco asked, seeing the change in Lorenzo's demeanor. The grief was still there, but it had calcified into something harder. Something like armor. Get the car, Lorenzo said. We aren't going to the wake. Where are we going? To the office, Lorenzo said, adjusting his cuffs. I need to audit the books. And Marco? Yes. Lock the doors when we get there. No one leaves until I find out who killed my family. As the black limousines pulled away from the cemetery, leaving Julian alone in the cold ground, the atmosphere in the city shifted. The storm wasn't clearing up. It was just beginning. Lorenzo Moretti had died in that burning house with his Omega. The man who drove away was something else entirely. A monster created by regret, fueled by vengeance, and armed with the knowledge that the knife in his back had been placed there by a friend. End of Part 2. Part 3. The conference room on the top floor of the Moretti Syndicate headquarters was soundproof. It was a glass box floating above the city, disconnected from the world below. The only sound was the rhythmic drumming of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows and the hum of the air filtration system. Lorenzo sat at the head of the long obsidian table. He hadn't turned on the main lights. The room was lit only by the blue glow of the city skyline and the solitary lamp on the table, which cast long, distorted shadows against the walls. Across from him sat his 4 pillars, the men who held up his empire. Marco, his underboss. Dante, his capo of street operations. Silas, the treasurer, a genius with numbers who could hide money from God himself. Vinny, the head of security, a mountain of a man who had guarded Lorenzo's back for 10 years. They looked uneasy. They had expected a war council. They had expected maps, guns, and plans to attack the Russos. Instead, they got silence. Lorenzo poured himself a glass of water. He didn't drink it. He watched the ripples settle on the surface. "Do you know why we are here?" Lorenzo asked softly. His voice was devoid of the rage he felt. It was cold, clinical. "To plan the retaliation against the Russos, boss," Dante said, cracking his knuckles. "We have men ready to hit their warehouses in the Bronx tonight." "No," Lorenzo said. He spun the wedding ring on his pinky finger. Julian's ring. "We are here because one of you is a rich man today." The air in the room vanished. The 4 men exchanged glances. Confusion. Fear. "Boss?" Marco asked, stepping closer to the table. "What are you talking about?" "I received a call at the funeral," Lorenzo said, his eyes scanning every twitch, every bead of sweat. "A little bird told me that the security grid at my estate wasn't bypassed. It was deactivated. From the inside. With a code." Vinny shifted in his seat. The leather chair creaked. "The Russos have hackers, Lorenzo. They could have brute-forced it. The encryption on my home system changes every 60 seconds, Lorenzo said, his gaze snapping to Vinny. "It's military grade. Even the NSA would need a week to crack it. But the logs show the system was turned off with a master override code at 8:42 p.m. Exactly 3 minutes before they breached the door." Lorenzo stood up. He walked slowly around the table, like a shark circling in shallow water. "Only 3 people had that code. Me, Julian, and my head of security." He stopped behind Vinny's chair. He could smell the man's scent, alpha musk, usually confident, now spiked with a sour tang of terror. "I didn't do it, boss," Vinny said quickly, too quickly. "I would never. I was at the warehouse district checking the shipment. I have witnesses." "I'm sure you do," Lorenzo said. "I'm sure you have a perfect alibi." He moved to Silas. "Open your laptop, Silas." The treasurer fumbled with his bag, pulling out his sleek silver laptop. What do you want me to look for, boss?" "Access the offshore routing logs," Lorenzo commanded. "Search for a deposit made 3 days ago. Origin, a shell company called Obsidian. Destination, any account linked to the men in this room." Silas's fingers flew across the keyboard. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. "I'm loyal to you, Lorenzo," Vinny said, sweat now visible on his forehead. "We grew up together. I held Julian's hand when he got sick last winter. I loved him." "Don't," Lorenzo whispered. The word was a blade. "Do not speak his name." "Found it," Silas said, his voice trembling. Lorenzo looked at the screen. Transaction ID, #9928, XA amount, $5 million sender. Obsidian Holdings, Cayman Islands, recipient, Vincent Vinny Moretti, private ledger. The room went dead silent. Vinny stared at the screen. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. $5 million, Lorenzo murmured. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from Vinny's ear. "Is that the price of my husband? $5 million? Is that what my unborn son was worth to you?" Vinny moved fast. He was an alpha, fueled by adrenaline. He shoved his chair back, knocking it into Lorenzo, and went for the gun holstered under his jacket. But Lorenzo was faster. He didn't reach for a weapon. He grabbed Vinny's wrist as it cleared the holster, twisting it with a sickening snap. Vinny howled, dropping the gun. Lorenzo slammed Vinny's head onto the obsidian table. Crack. The sound of a nose breaking echoed in the room. "Grab him!" Lorenzo roared. Marco and Dante were on him in a second. They pinned the thrashing head of security to the table, holding his arms splayed out. Vinny was spitting blood onto the polished black surface. "It was business, Lorenzo. It was just business." "Business?" Lorenzo asked, picking up the discarded gun. He checked the chamber. "Loaded. You sold my family for business?" "You were weak." Vinny screamed, his facade crumbling into desperation. "Ever since you bonded with that Omega, you went soft. You were making peace treaties with the Russos instead of crushing them. The Russos promised me the territory if I helped them take you out. They said you were unfit to lead. Lorenzo stared at him. He didn't see Vinny. He saw Julian huddled in the closet. He saw the text message. I'll be waiting for you. Always. I was making peace, Lorenzo said softly, so that my child wouldn't have to grow up in a war zone. I was building a future. He walked to the window, looking out at the rain. Who did you speak to? Who gave the order? Was it Don Russo? If I tell you, will you let me live? Vinny gasped. I can leave. I'll go to South America. You'll never see me again. Lorenzo turned back. His eyes were dead. You are already dead, Vincent. The only thing you can negotiate for is how long it takes. Vinny sobbed. A broken, pathetic sound. It was Santino, the Don's son. He hated that you rejected his sister to marry Julian. He wanted to hurt you. He said killing you was too easy. He wanted to break you first. Santino Russo, the arrogant, spoiled heir. The man who had smiled at Lorenzo at the funeral. Santino, Lorenzo tasted the name. It tasted like blood. I told you. Vinny pleaded. I told you everything. Please, Lorenzo. We're cousins. We're blood. Lorenzo walked back to the table. He placed the gun against Vinny's hand, the hand that had entered the override code. You are not my blood, Lorenzo said. You are a disease. Bang. Vinny screamed as the bullet shattered his hand. That was for disabling the alarm, Lorenzo said calmly. Bang. The second shot took out the other hand. Vinny's scream turned into a high-pitched keen. That was for the text message Julian tried to send. Lorenzo holstered the gun. He picked up a heavy glass decanter of whiskey from the sidebar. He poured the alcohol over Vinny's shattered hands. The scream that followed was inhuman. Marco, Lorenzo said. Yes, boss. Marco was pale, but his grip on Vinny didn't waver. Take him to the basement. Keep him alive. Vinny's eyes widened in horror. No, just kill me. Lorenzo, please. You let my Omega die alone and terrified in the dark, Lorenzo said, leaning close. You let him bleed out while calling my name. You don't get the mercy of a bullet. Lorenzo grabbed Vinny's hair, forcing his head up. You are going to help me send a message to Santino Russo. A message he won't be able to ignore. 2 hours later, the rain had turned into a storm. Thunder rattled the windows of the exclusive nightclub Velvet, the crown jewel of the Russo territory. Santino Russo sat in the VIP booth, surrounded by laughing women and expensive vodka. He was high on cocaine and victory. He had done it. He had crippled the great Lorenzo Moretti. To the future. Santino shouted over the thumping bass music, raising a shot glass. A bouncer pushed through the curtains of the VIP section. He looked terrified. Boss, the bouncer shouted. There's a delivery for you. Outside. I didn't order anything, Santino laughed, grabbing a woman's waist. Tell them to leave it. They drove a truck through the front barricade, boss. You need to see this. Santino frowned. He shoved the woman away and stood up, swaying slightly. If this is a joke, I'll skin you. He walked out the back exit, followed by his bodyguards. In the alleyway, bathed in the neon red light of the club's sign, sat a black SUV. The engine was running. The headlights were off. On the hood of the car sat a large, gift-wrapped box. It was elegant, black paper with a silver ribbon. Check it for a bomb, Santino ordered, stepping back. One of his guards approached cautiously with a scanner. No explosives, boss. It's just a box. Santino stepped forward. Curiosity won over caution. He pulled a knife from his pocket and slashed the ribbon. He kicked the lid off. Inside was not a bomb. It was Vinny's head. The eyes were sewn shut with silver thread. The mouth was stuffed with $100 bills. And carved into the forehead, deeply and crudely, was a single word. Begin. Santino stumbled back, vomiting onto the pavement. His phone buzzed. He stared at it. It was a text from an unknown number. He opened it with shaking hands. It was a video file. He pressed play. The video showed Lorenzo Moretti, sitting in a dark room. He was calm. He was cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Hello, Santino, the video Lorenzo said. His voice was soft, intimate, terrifying. I received your gift. I didn't like it, so I returned the receipt. Lorenzo looked up at the camera. The blue fire in his eyes burned through the screen. You took my past. You took my future. So now, I am going to take your present. Do not sleep. Do not close your eyes. Every shadow is me. Every noise is me. Lorenzo leaned forward. I blocked my husband's call, and it cost him his life. I suggest you keep your phone on, Santino. Because when I come for you, I want to hear you beg. The screen went black. Santino dropped the phone. He looked at his guards. Pack everything. Santino screamed, his voice cracking. We're leaving. Get my father. We're going to the safe house. The hunt. Lorenzo stood on the roof of a building across the street from the nightclub. He watched through the scope of a sniper rifle as Santino ran around like a panicked rat in the alleyway. Do you want the shot, boss? Marco asked beside him. I have a clear line on Santino. Lorenzo lowered the rifle. No, no. If I kill him now, he doesn't suffer, Lorenzo said. He stood up, the wind whipping his coat around him. He killed Julian with fear before he killed him with a bullet. I want Santino to feel that fear. I want him to run. I want him to mourn his life before he loses it. Where are they going? Marco asked. The Russo safe house in the Hamptons, Lorenzo said. Silas tracked their emergency extraction protocols. They think they are going to a fortress. Lorenzo turned to walk away. Prepare the men, Marco. And get the specialized equipment. What equipment? Lorenzo stopped at the door to the roof access. The jammers, Lorenzo said. When we hit that house, I want total isolation. No signals in. No signals out. I want them to know exactly what it feels like to call for help and get no answer. He touched the wedding ring on his finger one last time. Tonight, the Russos learn what it means to be blocked. The safe house, 3 a.m. The Russo estate in the Hamptons was a fortress. High walls, electrified fences, armed guards patrolling with dogs. Don Russo paced the living room. Calm down, Santino. He sent me ahead, Papa. Santino was pacing, a glass of scotch in his hand shaking so hard the liquid spilled. He knows. He knows everything. He is one man, Don Russo spat. We are an army. We have 50 men outside. He cannot touch us here. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Then they died. The entire house plunged into darkness. The generator. Russo barked. Get the backup generator. Sir, a guard shouted from the hallway. The phones are dead. Landlines are cut. Santino pulled out his cell phone. No service. He's jamming us, Santino whispered. He said he would. Outside, a single gunshot cracked through the night silence. Then another. Then the sound of a dog yelping, cut short. They're breaching the perimeter. Don Russo grabbed a shotgun from the mantel. Stand your ground. Kill anything that moves. But the enemy wasn't charging the front gate. Lorenzo Moretti was already inside. He moved through the dark corridors of the servants' wing like a wraith. He wore tactical gear, night vision goggles, and carried a suppressed pistol. He didn't run. He walked. He found the first guard in the kitchen. Puffed. One shot to the temple. The guard fell silently. Lorenzo stepped over the body. He wasn't here for the foot soldiers. He was making his way to the panic room. He knew the layout of this house better than the Russos did. Why? Because Julian used to work here. Before Lorenzo met him, Julian had been a caterer. He had worked parties at this very house. He had told Lorenzo stories about how the Russos treated the staff like dirt. Julian had mentioned the hidden service tunnels. Lorenzo slipped into the ventilation shaft that led directly to the master study. He could hear them arguing below. We need to negotiate. Santino was crying. Give him territory. Give him money. Shut up, Don Russo roared. Lorenzo removed the grate from the vent. He dropped down silently onto the thick carpet behind the heavy velvet curtains. He was in the room with them. There were 4 guards, the Don and Santino. Lorenzo waited. He wanted the perfect moment. Try the sat phone again. Russo yelled. It's not working. Santino screamed. Nothing is working. Lorenzo stepped out from behind the curtain. Can I be of assistance? The room froze. Before the guards could raise their weapons, Lorenzo shot the 2 on the left. Puffed, puffed. 2 precise shots to the throat. The other 2 guards hesitated, afraid to hit the Don. That hesitation cost them their lives. Lorenzo threw a flashbang grenade. Not a lethal one, but a blinder. Bang. White light filled the room. High-pitched ringing. When Santino's vision cleared, blinking through the tears, he saw a nightmare. The 4 guards were dead. Don Russo was on his knees, clutching a bleeding leg. And Lorenzo Moretti was sitting in the Don's leather armchair, legs crossed, gun resting casually on his knee. Good evening, gentlemen, Lorenzo said. His voice was conversational, almost polite. I believe we have some unfinished business regarding a phone call. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Not his phone. Julian's phone. The screen was cracked, stained with dried blood. Lorenzo placed it on the desk between them. This phone, Lorenzo said, pointing to it, received 17 calls that were never answered. 17 voicemails that were never heard in time. He looked at Santino, who was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Tonight, we are going to play a game, Santino. I'm going to give you a 10-minute head start. You can run into the woods. If you can reach the highway and flag down a car, you live. Santino's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. Really? You swear? I swear on my husband's grave, Lorenzo lied. He stood up. But there is a catch. What? I will be hunting you. And I will be calling this phone. Lorenzo tapped Julian's broken device. You have to carry it. If you answer the call before I find you, maybe we can talk about Mercy. Santino scrambled for the phone. I'll do it. I'll do it. Run, Lorenzo whispered. Santino bolted. He ran out of the study, over the bodies of his guards, and out into the dark, stormy night. Lorenzo watched him go. He didn't move. You let him go, Don Russo groaned from the floor, clutching his bleeding leg. You are a fool. Lorenzo looked down at the old man. I didn't let him go, Don Russo. I just want him to know what it feels like to run through the dark, calling for help, knowing that the monster is right behind him. Lorenzo racked the slide of his pistol. But you don't get to run. The Don looked up, defiant to the end. Do it. Send me to hell. Hell is full, Lorenzo said. Say hello to my son when you get there. Tell him his father is sorry. Bang. Lorenzo stepped over the Don's body. He walked to the window and watched the figure of Santino disappearing into the woods. He waited 1 minute. 2. Then, he pulled out his own phone. He dialed Julian's number. Far out in the woods, a tiny, glowing screen lit up in the darkness. A beacon. Lorenzo smiled. It was a terrible, broken smile. Ready or not, Santino, he whispered. Here I come. End of Part 3. Part 4. The forest was not a sanctuary. It was a cage made of shadows and rain. Santino Russo ran until his lungs burned like they were filled with acid. Branches whipped across his face, slicing his skin, but he didn't feel the pain. He only felt the terror, a cold, living thing that had coiled itself around his heart. He was holding the phone. Julian's phone. It was slippery with rain and mud, but Santino gripped it like a lifeline. Lorenzo had said if he answered, they could talk about Mercy. It was a lie. Santino knew it was a lie, but it was the only hope he had left. The woods were silent, save for the roar of the wind and the crunch of his own expensive Italian leather shoes on the dead leaves. Biziti, biziti. The phone vibrated in his hand. The screen lit up, cutting through the darkness with a ghostly white glow. Incoming call, Alpha Lorenzo. Santino gasped, sliding to a halt behind a thick oak tree. His thumb hovered over the green icon. He was shaking so violently he almost dropped the device. Hello. Santino screamed into the phone. Lorenzo. I answered. I answered the call. Silence. Then a voice. It wasn't the rage-filled roar of a monster. It was calm. Terrifyingly calm. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Turn around, Santino. Santino spun around, his eyes wild, scanning the dark tree line. Where are you? I can't see you. That's the point. Lorenzo's voice purred through the speaker. Julian couldn't see the help he needed either. He called me. He waited. He hoped. I'm sorry. Santino sobbed, sinking to his knees in the mud. It was my father's idea. I just wanted the territory. I didn't want the Omega to die. Liar, Lorenzo whispered. I heard the recording. I heard you laugh. You told him he was all alone. A twig snapped to Santino's left. Santino scrambled up and ran again. I answered. You said if I answered. I said we could talk about Mercy, Lorenzo interrupted. I never said I would give it to you. I just wanted to hear you beg. I wanted to know if your voice shakes as much as his did. Santino sprinted toward a clearing. He could see the highway lights in the distance. Salvation. If he could just reach the road, flag down a truck, get to the police. He burst into the clearing and stopped. Lorenzo Moretti was standing in the center of the clearing. He wasn't even out of breath. He stood perfectly still, the rain plastering his black hair to his forehead, his tactical vest soaking wet. He looked like a statue carved from vengeance. He held a pistol in his right hand. It hung loosely by his side. You're fast, Lorenzo said, tilting his head. But fear makes you sloppy. You ran in a circle, Santino. Santino looked around. He recognized the tree stump. He recognized the rock formation. He hadn't run toward the highway. He had run deeper into the estate grounds. Please, Santino wheezed, holding the phone out like an offering. Take it. Take the phone. Take the empire. I'll sign everything over to you. The ports. The drugs. Everything. Lorenzo stepped forward. The mud didn't seem to cling to his boots. You think this is about territory? Lorenzo asked, genuinely confused. You think I want your money? He took another step. Santino stumbled back, tripping over a root and falling onto his back. He scrabbled away, kicking at the dirt like a crab. I have money, Lorenzo said, looming over him. I have power. I have the city. Lorenzo knelt down, bringing his face inches from Santino's. The alpha dominance radiating off him was suffocating. It made the air taste like ozone and blood. But I don't have him, Lorenzo whispered. And I don't have my son. Santino froze. Son. 9 weeks, Lorenzo said. He was the size of a grape. And you killed him before he ever took a breath. Lorenzo reached out and gently took the phone from Santino's paralyzed hand. He looked at the screen. The call was still active. Call duration, 3:48. You answered on the first ring, Lorenzo noted. Good. That was smart. So let me go. Santino whimpered. Lorenzo ended the call. The screen went black. Julian called 7 times, Lorenzo said softly. He placed the phone in his pocket, right over his heart. 7 times he reached out for me. 7 times he got silence. Lorenzo stood up and racked the slide of his pistol. I'm going to give you the same chance I gave him. Lorenzo turned his back on Santino. Run, Lorenzo commanded. Santino didn't hesitate. He scrambled up and bolted toward the trees. He didn't look back. He ran with the desperation of a man who had seen the face of death and been given a reprieve. He made it 10 steps. Bang! The bullet took out his right kneecap. Santino screamed, crashing into the mud. 1. Lorenzo counted loud enough to be heard over the storm. Santino dragged himself forward, clawing at the earth. You promised. Bang. The left kneecap shattered. 2, Lorenzo said, walking slowly behind him. Santino was crawling now, using his elbows, weeping, snot and blood mixing on his face. Please. Just kill me. Please. Bang. Right shoulder. 3. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Bang. Left shoulder. 4. Santino couldn't move. He lay face down in the mud, a broken doll. He could only twitch. The pain was blinding, white-hot, consuming his entire universe. Lorenzo stood over him. He looked down at the man who had destroyed his life. He felt nothing. No joy. No relief. Just the cold, heavy weight of the rain. 5, Lorenzo whispered, shooting Santino in the lower spine. 6, he said, shooting the ground right next to Santino's ear, making him flinch one last time. Lorenzo crouched down. He placed the barrel of the gun against the back of Santino's head. 7. He didn't pull the trigger immediately. He leaned in close. Do you know what the worst part is, Santino? Lorenzo murmured. When I blocked his number, I thought I was being strong. I thought I was being a leader. A tear leaked from Lorenzo's eye, tracing a path through the rain on his cheek. I would give my entire empire, Lorenzo's voice broke, just to hear his phone ring one more time, just to see his name on that screen. But you took that from me. Go to hell, Santino gargled, choking on blood. I'm already there, Lorenzo said. Bang. The woods went silent. The aftermath, 1 week later. The city of New York was gray. It wasn't just the weather. It was the mood. The underworld had shifted on its axis. The Russo family was extinct. Their warehouses were burned, their assets seized, their bloodline ended. Lorenzo Moretti sat in the penthouse of the Obsidian Tower. He hadn't gone back to the estate. He couldn't. The smell of smoke and death still lingered there in his mind. He sat in the dark, staring at the panoramic view of the city he now ruled absolutely. On the glass coffee table in front of him sat 2 phones. His own. And Julian's. Julian's phone was charged now. Lorenzo kept it plugged in. He kept it cleaned. He picked it up. He unlocked it. He knew the passcode. 10/21, their anniversary. He opened the photo gallery. There were hundreds of photos. Julian smiling in the garden. Julian holding their cat. Julian sleeping, taken by Lorenzo on a lazy Sunday morning. Lorenzo scrolled until he found the last video taken. The timestamp was from the morning of the gala. He pressed play. On the screen, Julian was holding the camera up, selfie style. He was glowing. His cheeks were flushed pink, his eyes sparkling. He looked nervous but incredibly happy. Okay, is it recording? Yes. Hi, Alpha. Lorenzo's breath hitched. He touched the screen, tracing Julian's face. I know you're busy with the merger, Video Julian said, biting his lip. And I know I've been annoying you lately with my anxiety. I'm sorry. My hormones are going crazy. Julian laughed, a soft, musical sound that stabbed Lorenzo in the chest. I have a surprise for you tonight. I was going to wait, but I can't keep it in. Look. On the screen, Julian moved the camera down. He held up a pair of tiny, knitted white booties. You're going to be a dad, Lorenzo. We're having a baby. Dr. Evans thinks it's a boy. An heir for your empire. Julian pulled the camera back to his face. There were tears in his eyes. I love you so much. I know you're going to be the best father. Please come home safely tonight. I'll be waiting. I love you, my alpha. The video ended. Lorenzo sat in the silence. He replayed it. And again. And again. You're going to be a dad, Lorenzo. He poured a glass of whiskey. He drank it. He poured another. I failed you, Lorenzo whispered to the empty room. I failed both of you. He looked at his own phone. The block list was empty now. But it didn't matter. There was a knock on the door. Go away, Lorenzo growled. Boss, it's urgent. It was Marco. I said leave me alone. It's about the estate, Lorenzo, Marco said through the door. The cleanup crew, they found something. Lorenzo's head snapped up. What? Marco opened the door slowly. He held a small, charred metal box in his hands. We were clearing the debris from the master bedroom, Marco said softly. Under the floorboards in the closet. We found a safe. It wasn't on the blueprints. Lorenzo stood up. Give it to me. Marco placed the box on the table. It was locked, but the heat damaged the mechanism. It popped open. Lorenzo reached out. His hands, usually so steady, were trembling. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, the velvet lining was untouched by the fire. There was a stack of letters and a USB drive. Lorenzo picked up the top letter. The handwriting was Julian's. Elegant, loopy script. To Lorenzo. If you are reading this, then my fears were right. Lorenzo felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He unfolded the letter. My dearest Alpha, I know you think I'm just an anxious Omega. I know you think I worry too much about shadows. But I haven't been honest with you. I didn't want to burden you while you were fighting for the merger. 3 months ago, I was approached. A man. He didn't give his name, but he smelled like sulfur and expensive cologne. He told me that the Russos weren't the only ones who wanted you dead. He told me that there is a council, a group of alphas who operate above the families. They call themselves the Architects. They think you are becoming too powerful, Lorenzo. They think you are dangerous because you are young and you don't follow the old rules. They told me that if I didn't spy on you, if I didn't give them your codes, they would kill you. They would kill us. Lorenzo stopped reading. The paper crinkled in his grip. Spy on him, Julian. He read on. I refused. Of course I refused. I would rather die than betray you. But I knew they were coming. That's why I was so scared. That's why I begged you to stay. I've been recording them, Lorenzo. Every time they called my burner phone to threaten me, I recorded it. The evidence is on the USB drive. Names, locations, bank accounts. The Russos were just the pawns. The Architects are the ones moving the pieces. I hope you never have to read this. I hope we grow old together, and I can burn this box. But if I'm gone, please, Lorenzo, don't just get revenge. Get justice. Take them all down. I love you. Forever. You're Julian. Lorenzo dropped the letter. The room spun. It wasn't just the Russos. It wasn't just a turf war. Julian hadn't been killed because of a blocked number. He hadn't been killed because of a security breach. He had been killed because he refused to betray Lorenzo. He had died protecting Lorenzo's secrets. All those times Julian had been clingy, anxious, terrified. He was shielding Lorenzo from a shadow war he didn't even know existed. Marco, Lorenzo said. His voice was no longer the voice of a grieving widower. It was the voice of a warlord. Yes, boss. Plug in the drive. Marco inserted the USB into the laptop. A list of files appeared. Audio recordings. Documents. Photos. Lorenzo clicked on a folder named Architects. Photos appeared on the screen. High-ranking politicians. Judges. The chief of police. And Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. There, in a grainy photo taken from a distance, was a man shaking hands with Santino Russo. It was Don Antonio, the head of the Sicilian mob. Lorenzo's godfather. The man who had sworn to protect him after his own father died. Antonio, Lorenzo breathed. He was at the wedding. He danced with Julian. Antonio controls the European imports, Marco said, looking sick. If he's involved, Lorenzo said, then the war isn't over. Lorenzo stood up. He walked to the window. The reflection in the glass showed a man who had been hollowed out by grief, only to be filled back up with cold, burning rage. He touched the bond mark on his neck. It was a scar now, a reminder of what he had lost. They thought cutting off the head of the snake would kill the body, Lorenzo said. They thought killing my Omega would break me. He turned back to Marco. Call the enforcers. All of them. Wake them up. Pull them out of their beds. What are we doing, boss? Lorenzo picked up Julian's letter and folded it carefully, placing it in his breast pocket. We are going to Italy, Lorenzo said. We are going to burn Rome to the ground. He looked at the empty chair at the table where Julian used to sit. I blocked his call, Lorenzo whispered. But I hear you now, Julian. I hear you loud and clear. End of part 4. Part 5. Sicily smelled of lemons, sea salt, and ancient blood. The private jet touched down on the tarmac of the Palermo airfield just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and orange. Lorenzo Moretti looked out the window. It was beautiful. Julian had always wanted to come here. Take me to Italy for our anniversary, Rin. Julian had whispered in bed 2 months ago, tracing the scars on Lorenzo's chest. I want to eat gelato and see where you grew up. I want our baby to know his roots. Lorenzo tightened his grip on the armrest until the leather creaked. He had promised. Next year, he had said. We'll go next year. There was no next year. There was only now. And now, Lorenzo hadn't come to eat gelato. He had come to turn the vineyards red. We are clear to disembark, boss, Marco said, standing in the aisle. He was checking the magazine of his submachine gun. Don Antonio's convoy is waiting. He thinks you're coming to surrender. Lorenzo stood up. He adjusted his black coat. He touched the breast pocket where Julian's letter rested against his heart. Let him think that, Lorenzo said. Hope is a cruel thing to give a dying man. The Villa of Roses, Western Sicily. Don Antonio's estate was a fortress disguised as paradise. High stone walls covered in blooming bougainvillea, guards patrolling with assault rifles hidden under tailored suits, and a terrace that overlooked the Tyrrhenian Sea. Don Antonio sat at the head of a white linen-covered table, surrounded by the other members of the architects. There was Jean-Luc, the French arms dealer, Kozlov, the Russian energy tycoon, and Senator Davies, the American politician who ensured the law looked the other way. You worry too much, Antonio, Jean-Luc said, sipping a vintage Chianti. Moretti is broken. He killed the Russos in a fit of passion, yes. But he is a wounded animal. He is coming here to kiss the ring and beg for protection. Antonio wasn't so sure. He was a man of 70, his face a map of wrinkles and cunning. He had known Lorenzo since the boy was in diapers. He knew the Moretti bloodline. They didn't break. They detonated. He found the safe, Antonio murmured, tapping his fingers on the table. My spies tell me he took something from the ruins of his house. Whatever he found, Senator Davies scoffed, it doesn't matter. We control the ports. We control the banks. If he steps out of line, we freeze his assets. He'll be a pauper by morning. The sound of engines interrupted them. A convoy of black SUVs swept up the long driveway, kicking up dust. He's here, Antonio said. He signaled to his guards. Keep your weapons ready, but do not fire unless I give the command. The cars stopped. The doors opened. Lorenzo Moretti stepped out. He looked different. The last time Antonio had seen him, at the wedding, Lorenzo had been vibrant, arrogant, full of life. Now he looked like a wraith. His skin was pale, his eyes hollowed out, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He wore all black, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone to reveal the silver chain of Julian's necklace. But it was the way he moved that terrified Antonio. He moved with a stillness that was unnatural. Godfather, Lorenzo said. His voice carried across the terrace, flat and cold. Lorenzo, my boy. Antonio stood up, opening his arms. Welcome home. I was heartbroken to hear about your loss. A tragedy. Lorenzo didn't walk into the embrace. He stopped 10 feet away. Marco and 6 other enforcers fanned out behind him, silent and grim. It was a tragedy, Lorenzo agreed. But tragedies are usually accidents, Antonio. My husband's death was an orchestrated event. Antonio lowered his arms. You are tired, Lorenzo. Sit. Drink with us. We have business to discuss. The void left by the Russos needs to be filled. Lorenzo looked at the table. He looked at the French dealer, the Russian, the senator. The architects, Lorenzo said. The air on the terrace froze. Senator Davies dropped his fork. Excuse me. Julian told me, Lorenzo said softly. In his letter, he told me about the council. He told me how you threatened him, how you tried to turn him against me. Lorenzo took a step forward. You called his burner phone. You told him that if he didn't give you my security codes, you would kill me. You terrorized a pregnant Omega for months. Antonio's face hardened. The mask of the benevolent uncle dropped. He was a liability, Lorenzo, Antonio spat. Look at you. You were the most promising alpha of your generation. And then you bonded with that soft, weak thing. You stopped expanding. You started talking about peace. We couldn't let you ruin the ecosystem we built. So you killed him, Lorenzo whispered. We pruned a branch to save the tree, Antonio said. It was necessary. And frankly, we did you a favor. You are free now. You can return to your true potential. Lorenzo laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. It sounded like leaves dragging over a tombstone. You're right, Antonio, Lorenzo said, reaching into his pocket. I am free. I'm free of mercy. I'm free of hesitation. And I'm free of the delusion that family means anything. Lorenzo pulled out his phone. What are you doing? The Russian, Kozlov barked. Calling for backup? We have 50 men on these grounds. I'm not calling for backup, Lorenzo said, tapping the screen. I'm making a transfer. A transfer. Silas, my treasurer, has been very busy, Lorenzo said calmly. You see, Julian was smart. He didn't just record your threats. He recorded the account numbers you gave him for the bribes. Lorenzo held up the phone. Transfer complete. Status, 0 balance. I just drained the architect's operational accounts, Lorenzo said. $2 billion. Gone. Donated to an Omega orphanage fund in Julian's name. The senator stood up, knocking his chair over. You can't do that. That's our money. And one more thing, Lorenzo said. He looked at Antonio. The 50 men you have on the grounds. The mercenaries. Kill him. Antonio screamed. Kill him now. The guards on the perimeter raised their rifles and turned them on Antonio. The architects froze. Mercenaries are loyal to money, Antonio, Lorenzo said, his eyes burning with blue fire. And you're broke. I, however, just wired every single one of them $1 million. Lorenzo signaled to Marco. Kill everyone, Lorenzo said. Except Antonio. The terrorists erupted. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The guards opened fire on the table. The French dealer took a bullet to the chest before he could even stand. The senator tried to run, but Marco caught him, throwing him over the stone railing to the cliffs below. Kozlov flipped the table, trying to use it as a shield, but the mercenaries flanked him. Antonio stood amidst the chaos, watching his empire crumble in seconds. He didn't run. He just stared at Lorenzo. Lorenzo walked through the gunfire. He didn't flinch. Bullets whizzed past him, shattering wine glasses and flower pots, but he walked a straight line to his godfather. He grabbed Antonio by the throat and slammed him against the stone wall of the villa. Stop, Antonio gasped, clawing at Lorenzo's hand. Lorenzo, look at me. I raised you. I changed your diapers. And you killed my son, Lorenzo roared, slamming him again. The gunfire stopped. The other architects were dead. The terrace was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the men and the sound of the sea below. Lorenzo held Antonio pinned to the wall. Julian called me, Lorenzo whispered, his face inches from the old man's. He called me while he was bleeding out, and I blocked him. Do you know why I blocked him? Antonio couldn't speak. His face was turning purple. Because I was meeting with you, Lorenzo said, a tear leaking from his eye. I was on the phone with you earlier that day. You told me to focus. You told me to ignore distractions. You set the stage. Lorenzo released Antonio's throat. The old man slid to the floor, gasping for air. I'm not going to kill you, Antonio, Lorenzo said. Antonio looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. You have honor. You are a Moretti. I'm going to leave you here, Lorenzo said. He turned to Marco. Give me the phone. Marco handed him a satellite phone. Lorenzo tossed it to Antonio. What is this? Antonio wheezed. Your enemies know you're broke, Lorenzo said. I leaked your location to the Calabrian Mafia. They've been waiting for a chance to take Sicily for 20 years. They will be here in 10 minutes. Antonio's eyes went wide with pure terror. The Calabrians were known for skinning their enemies alive. You have one phone, Lorenzo said, turning to walk away. You can call them and beg. Or you can call your friends. Oh wait, they're all dead. Lorenzo! Antonio screamed, struggling to his feet. You can't leave me to them. It's a death sentence. Lorenzo stopped. He didn't look back. Make the call, Antonio, Lorenzo said. Maybe they'll answer. But if I were you, I wouldn't count on it. Lorenzo walked back to the SUVs. He got in. Let's go, he ordered. As the convoy drove away down the winding coastal road, Lorenzo watched the villa in the rearview mirror. He didn't see the flames yet, but he knew they were coming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Julian's phone. He opened the voicemail. Voicemail 1. Duration 042. He pressed play. He held the phone to his ear, closing his eyes against the Sicilian sunset. Lorenzo? Alpha? Please. I hear them downstairs. I'm here, baby, Lorenzo whispered to the ghost in the machine. I got them. I got them all. The catacombs, Rome. 2 days later. The war was technically over. The Russos were dead. The architects were dismantled. Lorenzo Moretti was the undisputed king of the underworld, ruling an empire that stretched across continents. But he didn't feel like a king. He felt like a ghost. He was in Rome, standing in the private underground vault of the Moretti family. It was cool and damp. He wasn't here for gold. He was here to bury something. He placed the small, charred metal box, the one containing Julian's letter and the USB drive, into a stone niche in the wall. Next to it, he placed the tiny pair of knitted white booties. He stared at them for a long time. They were so small. They would never be worn. Boss. Lorenzo didn't turn. Leave me, Marco. Boss, you've been down here for hours. We need to go back to New York. The families are waiting for your address. I'm not going back to New York, Lorenzo said. Marco paused. What? Lorenzo turned. His face was gaunt, his expression finalized. I sold the tower, Marco. I sold the estate. I sold the penthouse. But the empire, Marco stammered. You won. You own everything. I own a graveyard, Lorenzo said. New York is a graveyard to me now. Every street corner, every restaurant, every view, it's all him. I see him everywhere. Lorenzo walked over to Marco and placed a hand on the beta's shoulder. The empire is yours, Marco. Marco's jaw dropped. Lorenzo, I can't. I'm a beta. The families won't accept. They will accept you because you have the army, Lorenzo said. And because if they don't, I will come back and kill them. You are the only one who didn't betray me. You tried to make me answer the phone. You tried to save him. Lorenzo took off his signet ring, the ring of the Capo dei Capi, and pressed it into Marco's hand. Take it. Rule well. Don't let the power blind you like it blinded me. Where will you go? Marco asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lorenzo looked at the stone niche where the white booties sat. There is a small house, Lorenzo said softly. On the coast near Positano. Julian saw it in a magazine once. He said it looked like a place where time stood still. He said we should retire there when we were old. You're 32, Lorenzo. I'm 1,000 years old, Marco. Lorenzo buttoned his coat. I'm going to buy that house. I'm going to plant a garden. Lavender. And I'm going to wait. Wait for what? Lorenzo smiled. It was a sad, beautiful smile. The smile of a man who had made peace with his own damnation. I'm going to wait until my time is up, and hope that when I finally close my eyes, he's there waiting for me, and hope that he forgives me. Epilogue 1 year later. The house on the cliff overlooked the sea. It was small, whitewashed, with blue shutters that banged in the wind. The garden was magnificent. Rows and rows of lavender swayed in the breeze, filling the air with a scent that was sweet and heartbreaking. A man sat on the terrace in a rocking chair. He was thin, his hair graying at the temples despite his youth. He held a book in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was watching the sunset. On the small table beside him sat a phone. It was an old model, screen cracked, battery kept alive by a charger cord running through the window. It never rang. It never would. But every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the man would pick it up. He would dial a number that no longer existed. He would wait for the beep. You've reached Julian. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message, and I'll call you back. Love you. The man would close his eyes, letting the sound of the voice wash over him like a benediction. Hi, baby, Lorenzo whispered. It's me. I watered the lavender today. It's growing well. He paused, listening to the silence of the empty house. I miss you, he choked out, the tears falling as freely as they had on the first day. I miss you every second. I'm sorry I blocked you. I'm so sorry. He sat there until the stars came out, a lonely king in a kingdom of flowers, holding a dead phone, waiting for a call back that would only come in the next life. And in the silence of the night, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the wind whispering back through the lavender. I know, Alpha. I know. I'll be waiting. End of Part 5. Part 6, The Lazarus Call. The wind on the cliffs of Positano usually whispered. Tonight it screamed. Lorenzo Moretti sat in his rocking chair on the terrace, a bottle of cheap wine by his feet. It was 3 a.m. The world was asleep, buried in the silence that Lorenzo had courted for a year. On the small table, the cracked phone, Julian's phone, sat connected to its charger, the little green light blinking like a heartbeat in the dark. Lorenzo stared at it. He had done this every night for 365 nights. He would drink until his hands stopped shaking, talk to the dead device, and wait for the ghosts to leave him alone. They never did. He reached out to touch the screen, a ritual of grief. Aring. Lorenzo froze. His hand hovered in midair. The sound was shrill, mechanical, impossible. Aring. He pulled his hand back, as if the phone were made of fire. It wasn't a hallucination. The screen was lit up. The vibration rattled against the wood of the table. Incoming call, unknown number. Lorenzo's heart hammered against his ribs, a painful, erratic rhythm. No one had this number. This phone had been dead since the night of the fire. The service had been canceled. It was a brick. He picked it up. His thumb trembled over the answer button. "Hello," he rasped, his voice rusty from disuse. Static. White noise. The sound of a connection stretching over miles and miles of ocean. "Run." The glass of wine by Lorenzo's feet shattered as he kicked it over standing up. The voice was weak. Broken. Barely a whisper. But it was the sound Lorenzo had heard in his dreams every night. It was the sound of vanilla and sea salt. "Who is this?" Lorenzo roared, gripping the balcony railing. "If this is a joke, I will find you and I will skin you alive. Who is this?" "Run, it hurts." The voice sobbed. "They said you stopped looking. They said you buried me." Lorenzo stopped breathing. The world tilted on its axis. "Julian," he whispered. The name tore out of his throat. "Julian, is that you?" "Dr. Evans." Julian gasped. "The clinic, underground, please, Alpha. I'm scared." Click. The line went dead. Lorenzo stood there in the darkness, the silence of the night rushing back in, but this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was electric. Julian was alive. Lorenzo didn't scream. He didn't cry. He felt a sensation he hadn't felt in a year, a cold, terrifying clarity. The fog of depression vanished instantly, burned away by the inferno of an alpha's protective instinct. He looked at his hands. They were steady. "Dr. Evans," Lorenzo said to the wind. The doctor who had performed the autopsy. The man who had looked Lorenzo in the eye and told him his son was dead. The man who had signed the death certificate. Lorenzo didn't pack a bag. He didn't lock the house. He walked to the shed in the garden, pulled aside a tarp, and uncovered the Ducati motorcycle he had sworn never to ride again. He fired the engine. The roar shattered the peace of the Italian countryside. The king was coming back. And this time, he wasn't bringing a funeral suit. He was bringing hell. The clinic, Zurich, Switzerland, 12 hours later. Dr. Evans was enjoying his retirement. The payout from the architects had been generous, enough to buy a chalet in the Alps, far away from the blood and grime of New York. He sat in his study, sipping brandy, watching the snow fall. The window exploded. Evans didn't even have time to scream before a black-clad figure vaulted through the shattered glass, rolling across the floor and coming to a stop with a gun pressed against Evans's forehead. Lorenzo Moretti looked like a demon. His hair was windblown, his eyes wild, his clothes stained with travel and rage. "Lorenzo!" Evans shrieked, dropping his glass. "You're supposed to be in Italy. You're retired." "I got a call," Lorenzo said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. From a dead man. He pistol-whipped Evans. Crack. The doctor fell out of his chair, blood streaming from his lip. "I washed his body." Lorenzo roared, kicking Evans in the ribs. "I held him. I felt the cold." "How? How did you do it?" "It wasn't him." Evans wheezed, curling into a ball. "It was a double. A John Doe from the morgue. We altered the features, the DNA test. I faked it." "Why?" Lorenzo aimed the gun at Evans's knee. "Why keep him alive? The architects are dead. Why torture me?" "Insurance." Evans cried. "Don Antonio, he knew you were volatile. He knew that if you ever went rogue, killing the Omega wouldn't be enough. He needed leverage. If you destroyed the architects, he was going to trade Julian for his life." Lorenzo felt bile rise in his throat. Julian hadn't just been killed. He had been stolen. He had been a prisoner for a year. While Lorenzo was crying over a grave, Julian was waiting for him. "Where is he?" Lorenzo asked. "I don't know. I swear." Bang. The bullet went through Evans's thigh. The doctor screamed. "Try again," Lorenzo said. "The Obsidian site." Evans sobbed. "A private facility in the mountains. It's automated. Left over from the Cold War. Antonio put him there. Nobody knows about it, but the AI." "Give me the coordinates," Lorenzo commanded. "And the access codes. If I give them to you, you'll kill me." Lorenzo leaned down. "Doctor, you died the moment you touched my husband. The only choice you have now is whether it's quick or slow. The Obsidian site, the Swiss Alps." The facility was buried deep inside a mountain, accessible only by a single cable car that swayed precariously over a 1,000-foot drop. It was a ghost prison, run by servers and automated locks. Lorenzo stood on the roof of the cable car as it ascended into the blizzard. The wind tried to tear him off, the cold tried to freeze his blood, but the bond mark on his neck, the one that had been a scar for a year, was burning. It wasn't a phantom pain anymore. It was a compass. "He is close." He is here. The car docked. Lorenzo didn't wait for the doors. He blew the lock with C4 explosives he'd taken from Evans's safe. He stormed into the facility. Security breach detected, a robotic voice announced. Initiating lockdown. Automated turrets dropped from the ceiling. Lorenzo moved. He didn't think, he reacted. He slid across the polished concrete floor, firing dual pistols with surgical precision. Bang! Bang! The cameras shattered. Bang! The turret sensors exploded. He sprinted down the sterile white hallways. Julian, he roared. Julian. He checked the cells. Empty. 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 Then he reached Sector 4, the maximum security wing. There was only one door. It was heavy steel, with a small viewing window. Lorenzo slammed his hand against the keypad. He punched in the code Evans had given him. Access denied. No, Lorenzo snarled. He tried again. Access denied. Evans lied, Lorenzo whispered. The rage that filled him was enough to crack the world. He backed up. He placed the last of his C4 on the hinges. He took cover around the corner. Boom. The door was blown inward. Smoke and dust filled the corridor. Lorenzo walked through the debris. The room inside was stark. A single bed. A chair. A window overlooking the endless snow. And on the bed, huddled under a thin blanket, was a figure. Lorenzo stopped. His gun clattered to the floor. The figure moved. Slowly, terrified, the person sat up. He was thin. So thin. His skin was pale as the snow outside. His hair had grown long and tangled. But the eyes. Those dough-brown eyes. Run, Julian whispered. He squinted through the dust. Is it real this time? Lorenzo fell to his knees. The strength that had allowed him to kill an empire left him instantly. Julian, Lorenzo choked out. Julian flinched. He held up his hands as if to ward off a blow. Don't hurt me. I didn't try to escape today. I promise. The words shattered Lorenzo's heart into a million pieces. No, baby, no, Lorenzo crawled forward, tears streaming down his face. It's me. It's really me. Look at me. He reached out, his hand trembling. He touched Julian's cheek. It was warm. It wasn't the cold wax of the body he had washed. It was warm, living flesh. Julian gasped at the touch. He looked into Lorenzo's eyes, and slowly, the recognition dawned. The fear melted into disbelief, then into an agony of relief. Alpha, Julian wailed. Lorenzo pulled him into his arms. They collided with the force of two stars crashing. Lorenzo buried his face in Julian's neck, inhaling the scent, faint, buried under antiseptic and fear, but still there. Vanilla. Sea salt. Life. I got you, Lorenzo sobbed, rocking him back and forth. I got you. I'm sorry I was late. I'm so sorry. You came, Julian cried, clinging to Lorenzo's coat, gripping the fabric so hard his knuckles turned white. I knew you would come. I told them. I told them my alpha would burn the world for me. I did, Lorenzo whispered. I burned it all. There's nothing left but us. The baby. Julian pulled back, his hands going to his flat stomach. His eyes filled with fresh tears. Lorenzo, I lost him. The stress, the first month. Shoo. Lorenzo kissed his forehead, his eyes, his tears. It doesn't matter. You're here. That's all that matters. Warning, the robotic voice announced. Self-destruct sequence initiated. T-minus 2 minutes. Lorenzo looked up. We have to go. He picked Julian up. Julian was light, dangerously light, but Lorenzo held him like he was the heaviest, most precious thing in the universe. Hold on to me, Lorenzo said. He ran. He ran through the collapsing facility. He ran as the lights flickered and died. He ran as the explosions began deep in the mountain. They reached the cable car. Lorenzo threw Julian inside and hit the override lever. As the car swung out over the abyss, the mountain behind them erupted. A plume of fire and snow shot into the sky, burying the prison, the torture, and the lost year forever. Lorenzo watched it burn. Then he turned to Julian. Julian was shivering. Lorenzo took off his coat and wrapped it around the Omega. He sat on the floor of the cable car and pulled Julian into his lap. Where are we going? Julian asked, his voice small. Lorenzo looked out at the white horizon. Home, Lorenzo said. To a garden. To the lavender. The final epilogue, 5 years later. The house on the cliff in Positano was no longer quiet. There was a tricycle on the terrace. There were toys scattered in the lavender bushes. Lorenzo sat on the stone wall, watching the sunset. He looked different. The lines of grief were gone, replaced by laugh lines. He was still fierce. The neighbors knew better than to cross the quiet man in the big house. But the darkness had lifted. Papa. A little boy, 4 years old with messy black hair and dough-brown eyes, ran across the terrace. He was holding a giant lemon. Look, it's bigger than my head. Lorenzo laughed, scooping the boy up. It is, Leo. It's a monster lemon. Leo, be careful. Don't run with the fruit. Julian walked out onto the terrace. He was healthy. He was radiant. The shadows of the prison had faded, healed by years of sun, therapy, and an alpha's unwavering devotion. He carried a tray of lemonade. He walked over to Lorenzo and Leo, leaning down to kiss Lorenzo's cheek. Who were you talking to? Julian asked. Just the wind, Lorenzo smiled, resting his hand on Julian's waist. Lorenzo looked at his phone sitting on the table. It was a new model. The old, cracked one was locked away in a safe, a relic of a past life. He thought about that night. The night he blocked the number. The night he died. He had died that night. The arrogant, ambitious mafia don was dead. He lay buried in a crypt in New York. The man who lived here, the husband, the father, the gardener, was someone else. He was a man who answered every call. He was a man who checked the locks 3 times a night. He was a man who knew exactly what he had almost lost. Run, Julian asked, sensing the shift in his mood. Are you okay? Lorenzo looked at his family. His son, Leo, named after the lion, the survivor. His mate, Julian, the miracle. I'm perfect, Lorenzo said. He pulled Julian down into his lap, ignoring Leo's giggles. I'm just listening, Lorenzo whispered. To what? To the sound of you breathing. Lorenzo kissed him. It wasn't a desperate kiss, or a grieving kiss. It was a promise. The blocked call was the mistake of a lifetime. But the second chance, that was the work of eternity. And on the cliffs of Positano, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the laughter of a child, the Alpha finally, truly exhaled. The end.